we all have to just be aware that this is a very dangerous time. It's not the time to be a cowboy and going all in on any one thing. You got to be careful. One of the things that I've been talking about a little bit is that this is the first cycle in Bitcoin bear cycle where you have high inflation, right? So starting in 2009, that's when it started. We didn't have high inflation, and this is the first period we do. And then also this is the first period where the Federal Reserve has actually stopped printing and is kind of reversing the printing press, is trying to suck money out. You just have to be a little careful here because it's really uncharted territory for cryptocurrencies as a whole. I love long-term crypto, at least the big players like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I do think that this is the .com moment for cryptocurrencies, and I don't think that maybe 5% of cryptos will survive this. But what that also tells me is we have to go lower because there's still way too many nonsense coins out there that really don't have a big use case. And it's actually a scary period because I do worry that this is uncharted territory, like you're saying, and it could spin us into something much, much worse later this decade. Because again, you get in this cycle of the Fed, when things get bad, politically, the Fed we know is not supposed to be political, but the bottom line is they're humans, they have hearts, they want to help people. So when they see people unemployed, and we know that's one of their mandates, they have to react. So if you start to see a recession and it gets to be a bad recession because of all the liquidity being sucked out and high inflation, if the Fed has to go back to printing of money, it just creates this cycle, and eventually that cycle does collapse. So you either get in Venezuelan type inflation, or you have to have this massive collapse and reset in the economy. And I do worry that the 100-year cycle of the 29 crash and the Great Depression is coming up. And I've said this before, but they always say that every generation has to experience something like that. And it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of those people that were in the Great Depression, there's not a lot of them left, unfortunately, to kind of remind us of the pitfalls. I still remember vividly my grandmother, they were relatively wealthy by the time they retired, but she still was into, so careful with money because she went through that period and remembered that period. And that's something just to kind of think about. And you have to wonder, this is where it gets really interesting, at least for me, as I'm trying to value altcoins, right? So you look at like a Cardano or a Polkadot or a Solana or an Avalanche, and you have to say, okay, well, if this was a company, what would it be valued at in the stock market based on its use case, right? And this is so hard to do, but again, would it be a multi-billion-dollar company, or would it be 100 million? It's so hard to value these coins. Again, that's one of the reasons why I'll trade the alts, but for the most part, man, when it comes to where I'm going to accumulate for a longer term hold, I got to stick with Bitcoin is my main holding, and then maybe a little bit of Ethereum in there. But it's just too hard to know the real valuations here. There's so many new investors that kind of came in with crypto, and crypto brought them in, the excitement of crypto. But I do hope that they understand some of these things, because I remember when I started investing in small caps, and that was my beginning, trying to make lots of money on a small amount of money, just like a lot of people do. And man, did I get hammered so many times just doing bad things and not really understanding. So people need to really understand what they're investing in. I'm still liking a short on oil here. I know that's the counter kind of, consensus thing out there, but I think that oil, to me, especially if the Fed's pushing us towards recession, it makes no sense that oil is going to go to 150 or 200, even with Russia's disruption and everything like that. So I'm in the camp that oil is near-term topping. I love the fact that the talking heads out there are so bullish. Everyone's saying, get in oil stocks. It's the safe place to be. And usually heck, they said that about Bitcoin at 65,000 with inflation coming. So just be aware of that. Go almost counter to what you're hearing, and you might be right more often. You have to look at this final washout, and it's going to be painful, but at the same time, it's so healthy, right? It's the equivalent of kind of getting a virus and your body fights it off and gets stronger by fighting it off. It's the Darwinian thought process of the strongest can survive, and then they thrive because there's not all this other crap in the system. So, even though I think it's going to go lower, the longer term is so rosy for Bitcoin and some of these other coins. As we creep up, you're going to get people to kind of start to believe that you might have a longer term low. You'll see more bullish chatter out there in the news media, and that'll just be a self-fulfilling prophecy to keep Bitcoin up a little bit. But inevitably, the next deleveraging event will occur. The stock market will come down again as we probably go deeper into a recession, an earnings recession. And we know that the NASDAQ has been a leader for Bitcoin, and therefore 12,000, 13,000 is my next target once we come back in. But in all fairness, I am long Bitcoin right now. I'm riding it at least to 25.5, and then maybe as high as 28 or so before I look to take profits and then look for that next wave down. I don't think we get regulation before the election. I think that to get that regulation, that's going to be forced on the politicians by that next dump. So let's say crypto does go down to 10,000. All right, at 20,000, how many bankruptcies have occurred? Now imagine a 50% haircut in Bitcoin from there. Now think about the destruction. And there's going to be a max pain level where there's so much destruction and so many investors getting burned that at some point the politicians will absolutely have to deal with. After the election makes a lot of sense. I will say this: I think that's when Bitcoin bottoms. As unpopular as saying that 6 months ago or a year ago was, I've really said that you have to put investor protections in there. That's so important because there's trillions of dollars, like pension funds, all these funds, trillions and trillions of dollars. And if they just allocate 2% to crypto, Bitcoin's at $250,000, with so much money like that. But they're not going to touch it as long as there's no regulation and no consumer protection. And I think people have to realize that Bitcoin is a 13-year-old. It's going to be wild. It's going to have crazy swings until it matures into kind of that more stable asset, which will come in time. And then I think you see a move to 25.5 near term. What I wouldn't want to see, I would feel very negative if we started to go back below 20,000. That would be very concerning. That would be a failure of this near term move up. So as long as it holds 20 and then it can break 21.8 or so, then I think 25 is reasonable. And then we'll have to see about if it continues up after that. But I think it's important to recognize that's a shorter term swing trade. My midterm outlook, which is like 3 months out, I still think we got to see more pain, because the higher the dollar goes, the weaker Bitcoin will naturally go because it's traded, or in this case, that's what I followed, the Bitcoin US dollar chart. So here's the dollar chart. And if I go to the monthly chart, you can really see what I'm looking at here. So there's a couple trend lines that tell me the dollar may have topped here, which to me, again, tells me if the dollar can decline, Bitcoin may catch a near-term bid on this pullback. Look at that move up in the dollar since the start of the year. And what's so crazy is that the whole thesis for Bitcoin was like, a year ago was that, the dollar is garbage because they're printing so much money. And the dollar's been the strongest thing out there. Amazing. But look at this little pivot low right here, and then this upsloping trend line. And that's getting me more like, okay, wait a minute. Did the dollar just top out today in the near term? And if we do pull back, maybe we see a little bit of an additional bid on Bitcoin. This is the daily chart, and I'm watching today's candle here because on the jobs report, the dollar spiked higher because it was a better than anticipated jobs report, which means that the Fed is likely to do 75 basis points, which is strengthening for the dollar. But again, one of the things that I think is key is watch price action off of news, and that tells you a lot. And we may have a decline in the dollar, which to me tells me gold probably rallies, silver rallies, and potentially Bitcoin can rally as well in the near term. Now, this is very near term. I still don't think the low is in, just like you. I still think we need to see capitulation. But I do think that at least the dollar should be followed here because it is a good indicator for the potential of Bitcoin putting in a bounce or a decent little bounce here.